On his wedding day with Mistress, Billionaire's pregnant wife arrives and slaps him in front of everyone. A veil of golden sunlight fell across the ornate garden, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the polished marble walkway. Dozens of society's elite arrived in designer dresses and tailored suits, whispering about the luxurious event that promised to be the wedding of the century. Among them stood a looming sense of intrigue no one could quite place. Everyone knew the groom, Oliver Harrington, a billionaire, famed for his relentless ambition. But there was a murmur that he was about to marry in great haste. The swirling rumors were soon to be overshadowed by a far greater shock. On this day, hearts would be shattered and secrets laid bare. Oliver Harrington was a man who believed that all problems in life had a price tag. At the age of 35, his vast wealth sprawled across continents. He owned high-end hotels in Paris, tech startups in Silicon Valley, and shipping lines in Southeast Asia. Raised in a privileged household in New York, Oliver had grown up observing the way money moved mountains and parted seas. He was the son of Charles Harrington, a legendary businessman who built an empire with unrelenting work ethic and ruthless deals. Now, with his father passed and the Harrington empire resting in his hands, Oliver's life had become a swirl of board meetings, negotiations, and lavish galas. The glitz of his existence was only matched by the darkness of the secrecy he guarded. Although he was still legally married to Evelyn Harrington, a reserved but strong-willed woman who carried herself with the dignified grace of old money breeding, he was standing at the altar on this very day with another woman, Clarissa Alden. Clarissa Alden was the type of woman people remembered. Tall and stunning, with raven black hair and piercing blue eyes, she had an allure that turned heads wherever she went. She had carved her own niche in the fashion industry with a line of haute couture gowns. But she was known just as much for her calculated cunning as she was for her beauty. Her romance with Oliver had begun a year ago, but rumors about their affair circulated well before that. When Clarissa stepped into society circles, she'd quickly identified Oliver as her golden ticket to everything she had ever dreamed of. For Clarissa, life was a game of moves, and Oliver was the grand prize. Though the Harrington family's circle tried to avert their eyes from scandal, they could not ignore the fact that Evelyn had been absent from high-profile gatherings for the past several months. Tongues wagged in private corners. Had Evelyn truly left Oliver? Why was Oliver moving so hastily to marry Clarissa without a divorce settlement in sight? Some said Evelyn had slipped away to Europe to escape humiliation. Others said she was ill. Oliver, for his part, refused to speak about it, simply forging ahead with his new bride. The venue for the wedding was the Harrington estate in Westchester County, a sprawling property that boasted manicured lawns, reflecting pools, and statues commissioned by the greatest sculptors of the modern era. White roses and hydrangeas decorated every corner, a testament to Clarissa's refined taste. Glistening chandeliers, imported from Italy, were suspended in the grand ballroom where the reception would follow. The guest list comprised the crème de la crème of society, CEOs, dignitaries, and a few Hollywood stars rumored to be on Clarissa's brand ambassador payroll. An hour before the ceremony was set to begin, staff hurried to finalize everything. Servers in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne. The wedding planner, Atticus Montgomery, rushed about, whispering orders into his headset. Oliver paced in the side courtyard, an expression hovering between impatience and fear. Beneath that polished, confident surface, a gnawing anxiety sapped his composure. He had wanted this day to be perfect. He always demanded perfection. But something felt off. His mother, Florence Harrington, had quietly refused to attend the wedding out of loyalty to Evelyn. Instead, She traveled to Geneva to spend time with old friends. Oliver didn't expect any of his extended family to show up either. They disapproved of him marrying again, while still entangled in so many unanswered questions surrounding his first marriage. But the blow that fate had in store for him would come not from the absence of loved ones, but from the presence of someone he hoped would never show her face again. In the mansion's bridal suite, Clarissa stood at a mirrored vanity table, adjusting the diamond-encrusted tiara pinned in her hair. Her mother, Lydia Alden, fussed over the lace sleeves of Clarissa's gown. Painted lips parted in a satisfied smile as Clarissa pictured the moment she would walk down the aisle. Soon she would no longer be just Clarissa Alden, but Clarissa Harrington, the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the country. Little did she know, a storm was rolling in a storm that would change everything, shaking the foundations of the Harrington empire more violently than any business deal or social scandal ever could. The stage was set, each player poised in their place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama that no one in attendance would ever forget. The sun reached its zenith, sending beams of light through the towering oak trees surrounding the estate. Rows of white chairs were meticulously arranged on the lawn, leading up to an altar adorned with even more white roses and a flowing silk canopy. The guests settled into their seats, glancing at the wedding programs, emblazoned with Oliver and Clarissa, a flourish of gold script beneath. A string quartet played softly in the background, the gentle melody drifting across the venue. Oliver stood near the altar, chatting tersely with his longtime friend and occasional business partner, Matthew Glenn. It was Matthew who had introduced Oliver to Clarissa, back when the idea of marriage to another woman seemed unthinkable. Under normal circumstances, Matthew would have been Oliver's best man. But even he was uneasy about the situation, offering only a forced smile when Oliver asked for reassurance. "Relax," Oliver murmured to himself, though his gaze darted toward the mansion's grand doors. He wondered if Clarissa was ready, if she had everything she needed. If he was honest, he was less worried about the ceremony's details and more about the possibility that the media or uninvited guests might show up. He had insisted on tight security, but a sense of foreboding gnawed at him. Next to the altar, Clarissa's father, Peter Alden, tried to hide his discomfort. Despite his acceptance of Oliver's wealth and status, he couldn't pretend to be excited about walking his daughter down the aisle under these circumstances. A scandal hovered over the day like a dark cloud. However, it was no secret that Peter and Lydia Alden had struggled financially for years, and Clarissa's marriage to Oliver offered them the security they had craved. So Peter smoothed his tie and steeled himself, ready to play his role. Inside the bridal suite, Clarissa inhaled deeply, her heart pounding in her chest. A swirl of emotions coursed through her, triumph, satisfaction, and an undercurrent of anxiety. She couldn't quite place. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror and forced a confident smile. "Today is my day," she reminded herself. "My future is set." She picked up her cascading bouquet of white orchids, took one last look in the mirror, and signaled for her mother to summon the wedding planner. In the foyer, Atticus Montgomery rushed in, flanked by two assistants. "It's time," he announced softly. The bride's party lined up, the flower girl and ring bearer stepping forward with adorable seriousness. A hush fell over the guests outside as the music changed to the bride's processional. Clarissa glided out the double doors, her arm tucked delicately into her father's. The sunlight kissed her gown, making the intricate beading sparkle as though she were wrapped in constellations. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the attendees. Oliver straightened his back, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Step by step, Clarissa moved closer to Oliver. Their gazes locked, and for a moment, it felt as though they were the only two people in the world. The efficient Dr. Nina Farnsworth A family friend who had officiated many of the Harrington weddings smiled warmly. The ceremony began with traditional vows, woven with personal anecdotes that painted a rosy portrait of love. Oliver slipped a brilliant diamond ring on Clarissa's finger. In that instant, a wave of relief washed over him. He thought, "This is it. Nothing can stop us now." But fate had a different plan. An unmistakable tremor passed through the crowd's hush as a figure appeared at the back of the aisle. Whispers flared, heads turned. Some stood up, craning their necks for a better view. A wave of confusion and shock rippled through the guests as they recognized the woman stepping forward, Evelyn Harrington, Oliver's estranged wife. Her hair was pinned back in a simple chignon, and she wore a dark green silk dress that accentuated her figure. There was no concealing her pregnancy. Though only a few months along, her rounded belly was undeniable. The sight of Evelyn in that condition caused gasps. She walked with calm deliberation, her eyes never leaving Oliver. Oliver's face went pale. Clarissa's bouquet trembled in her hands. "Even Dr. Farnsworth faltered, her practiced composure vanishing for a split second. Evelyn's expression was grave, her hands steady at her sides. She made her way down the aisle as if she were the bride, not Clarissa. Each step was accompanied by the hush of a crowd that seemed to forget how to breathe. When Evelyn finally reached the altar, she locked eyes with Oliver. Her voice was strong, resonating through the tense silence. "I believe," she said, "there's something everyone here needs to know before this farce goes any further." And at that moment, the tension that had been building for months snapped like a rope stretched too taut. The dramatic confrontation that would follow was no longer just a fear in Oliver's mind. It was reality unfolding, unstoppable, and catastrophic. Every single guest felt the gravity of the moment. Wedding or not, this day had just shifted into scandalous territory from which none of them would emerge unchanged. A collective chill descended on the gathering. Gone was the tranquil daydream of a perfect wedding. In its place stood an uncomfortable and startling showdown. Evelyn's dignified stance belied the storm in her eyes. She wasn't here to beg or plead, she was here to deliver a blow. Clarissa's cheeks burned. Her heart thundered against her ribs, and her mind raced with a single question: how dare she come here? At the same time, she felt a flicker of fear. She had orchestrated everything to ensure Evelyn stayed out of the picture. Wasn't she supposed to be in Europe or whisked away somewhere discreet? Oliver swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. He struggled to maintain composure, but every second that Evelyn stood there with her undeniable pregnancy was a reminder of how deeply he had miscalculated. He found his voice at last, his tone carefully guarded. "Evelyn," he said, "what are you doing here?" Evelyn glanced at Clarissa, then the crowd, before focusing on Oliver again. "I'm here because I have something to say to you, to her, and to everyone who believes this ceremony is legitimate." Clarissa tried to reclaim the upper hand. "This ceremony is legitimate," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Oliver and I are in love. You walked away from him." "I never walked away," Evelyn countered, eyes flashing. "I left to gather my strength after learning what you two had done behind my back. And I'm here to set the record straight." Dr. Farnsworth cleared her throat as though to step in, but Evelyn held up a hand. "Not yet," she said, politely but firmly. "Let the bride and groom have their moment of truth first." Oliver's gaze darted around, seeking an escape. The stares of his esteemed guests weighed heavily on him. His heart hammered as he realized there was no graceful exit. "Whatever you need to say it," he said finally, his voice dipping into a strained baritone. Evelyn took a steadying breath. "Oliver and I are still legally married," she began. "I never signed any divorce papers, nor was I served any. And there's more, this child," she placed a hand on her rounded belly, "is yours, Oliver. whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. At that statement, the entire crowd erupted in gasps. A few reporters who had managed to slip through security snapped photos and jotted notes in hushed frenzy. The scandal had arrived, and it was monumental. Clarissa staggered back a step, the color draining from her face. "She's lying," she hissed. "She's just trying to ruin our day." Evelyn's expression hardened. "Believe me, Clarissa, my intention is not to ruin anything. But I won't allow this deception to continue. Oliver, you tried to force me into the shadows as if I were an inconvenience to your new life. But I won't let you deny our marriage or this child." Oliver felt the world spin, as if the earth beneath him was ready to swallow him whole. He'd counted on Evelyn's silence. He had threatened, pleaded, cajoled. He'd used financial and emotional pressure to keep her out of sight and out of mind. But none of that could match the resolve blazing in her eyes now. The crowd watched with rapt attention. Some guests exchanged mortified glances, others were riveted by the drama unfolding live. Social media posts were likely already racing across the internet, broadcasting the chaos in real time. From behind the last row of seats, Oliver's security detail stood, uncertain whether to intervene. In that split second, Evelyn turned her attention to Clarissa. Her voice, though calm, bristled with tension. "You can wear a white dress, hold $1 million bouquet, and even take vows, but that will never change the fact that Oliver Harrington is still my husband." Clarissa's eyes flickered with rage. "If you'd been the wife he needed, maybe this wouldn't have happened," she snapped. "You think you can just walk in here and—" Before she could finish, Evelyn took a decisive step forward and, in one fluid motion, slapped Oliver across the face. The crack echoed across the lawn. Oliver stood stunned, a red imprint spreading across his cheek. It was an act of finality, a punctuation mark on months of simmering betrayal and hidden truths. The crowd collectively gasped. Even Clarissa looked momentarily shocked. No one had expected Evelyn to break her veneer of composure so dramatically. Oliver touched his cheek, his eyes widening. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. In his entire life, he had never been humiliated like this, not by a competitor, not by a family member, and certainly not by his own wife. Evelyn turned to the gathered guests, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You all came here to witness a wedding, but instead, I hope you bear witness to this, the truth about a man who would discard his wife and unborn child for the sake of ambition and convenience. This ceremony is a sham, and as for me, I will not be erased." She pivoted, eyes scanning the aisle. The hush that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the soft notes of the string quartet, still playing quietly, as if uncertain whether to continue. Then, with the same calm determination she'd shown upon her arrival, Evelyn walked back up the aisle, a swirl of stunned onlookers parting before her. As the final note of the processional died away, every person in attendance understood that the Harrington family had just been irreversibly fractured. A bride stood abandoned at the altar, a groom was reeling from a public slap, and a wife left the scene carrying the future heir to the entire empire. Time seemed to stop in the aftermath of Evelyn's exit. Most of the guests remained frozen in their seats, uncertain whether to stay or flee. Clarissa, her face a mixture of mortification and rage, spun toward Oliver. "Well," she hissed, voice low enough that only he and those closest to the altar could hear, "do something." Oliver took a long, trembling breath. The sting on his cheek refused to fade, both physically and emotionally. He raised a hand to quiet Clarissa, but she knocked his arm away. "Don't you dare shush me," she hissed again, stepping closer, her teeth clenched in fury. "Your wife, no, your pregnant wife just humiliated me in front of everyone." With dozens of eyes still on them, Oliver kept his composure as best he could. He cleared his throat and addressed the gathering in a voice that quivered despite his efforts. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, I apologize for this disturbance. Perhaps it's best we reconvene inside for a moment and handle matters. The ceremony is temporarily on hold, on hold." Those words sent a murmur through the guests. Some took the cue and began to stand, slipping away from the chairs to mingle in hushed voices or head toward the lavish ballroom to await further instructions. Meanwhile, Clarissa stomped down the short flight of steps, disappearing into the mansion with her father and mother trailing behind her. Matthew Glenn approached Oliver, placing a sympathetic hand on his friend's shoulder. "You need to get ahead of this," Matthew whispered urgently. "The press will have a field day. This is bigger than just society gossip." Oliver's eyes, once so sharp and decisive, looked dull with defeat. "I know," he replied, massaging his temples. I never imagined she'd do something like this." "Evelyn's always been so submissive," a voice asked from behind them. It was Susan Farnsworth, Dr. Farnsworth's sister and a close acquaintance of the Harrington family. She shook her head. "Evelyn was always too polite and private to make a scene. You must have pushed her too far, Oliver." Oliver bit back a retort. Deep down, he knew that he had pushed Evelyn away. Threats, manipulations, and a total disregard for her feelings had likely built up to her final act of defiance. Now, with an unborn child in the equation, the scandal was monumental. The board of his companies would be horrified, his mother would be devastated, and the already precarious Harrington reputation risked a catastrophic blow. Dr. Farnsworth stepped in, placing a gentle hand on Oliver's arm. Her glasses slipped down her nose a fraction, and she peered at him with concern. "Do you want me to make an announcement? Formally postpone everything and guide the guests to the reception hall?" "Yes, please," Oliver croaked, his throat dry. "This is a personal matter, and I'll need to speak with Clarissa in private. Possibly even with Evelyn. If she's still around." Dr. Farnsworth nodded, then made her way toward the microphone stand near the altar, clearing her throat to gather attention. Meanwhile, Oliver and Matthew hurried inside, heading toward one of the ornate drawing rooms where Clarissa had presumably taken refuge. The Harrington mansion's interior was a blur of marble floors, gilded mirrors, and frantic staff. A flurry of caterers and event planners brushed past them, unsure whether to continue setting up the post-ceremony festivities or to pack up entirely. Atticus Montgomery, the wedding planner, looked close to tears. His dream of orchestrating the most glamorous wedding of the decade was unraveling. Oliver found Clarissa standing near a grand fireplace, the hem of her wedding gown pulled dramatically around her. Her parents hovered nearby like statues, equally red-faced. When Oliver entered, Clarissa's eyes snapped to him, burning with betrayal and anger. "How could you not tell me she was pregnant?" she said, her voice trembling. "When you said you still had a few loose ends with Evelyn, I never imagined it involved a baby." Oliver tried to keep his voice low, but the tension made it impossible. "I didn't know." He nearly shouted in his frustration. "She never told me she was carrying my child. Yes, I suspected something, but she disappeared. Every time I tried to contact her, Clarissa cut him off." "Contact her? You told me you were working on divorce papers." "That's it. You said there was no possibility of her coming back into your life." Matthew stepped between them, palms up. "Listen, both of you, calm down. We need a plan, not an argument." He shot Oliver a warning glance. "Do you realize how serious this is? Evelyn's pregnant. She's still your legal wife. You can't just marry Clarissa without finalizing anything. You risk bigamy charges on top of everything else." Peter Alden, Clarissa's father, rubbed his temples in despair. "The reporters will rip us all apart. This wedding is a public fiasco. Our family name, your family name, Clarissa spat, directing her fury at her father. What about me? My career? My reputation? My marriage that may not even be legal? Oliver closed his eyes for a moment, grappling with the chaos he had created. All right, he said, forcing a measured calm into his voice. Let's salvage what we can. We'll postpone the ceremony. Tell the guests there was a misunderstanding or a family emergency. Matthew, get our PR firm on the phone immediately. We need an official statement drafted. About what? Clarissa asked, crossing her arms. You can't just wave your hand and make a pregnant wife disappear. This is out, Oliver. The entire world knows now. Oliver's gaze dropped to the floor. Indeed, no amount of money or influence could brush aside a public confrontation at his own wedding. He felt an urgent need to speak with Evelyn. He needed to understand why she'd come back so brazenly. Now, after all these months, was she planning to extort him? Did she want a bigger settlement? Or perhaps, was she simply done being cast aside? He raked a hand through his hair, loosening the meticulously styled strands. Let me think, he said again, his voice hollow. I need some air. I'll be back. Without waiting for a response, Oliver strode out of the drawing room, leaving Clarissa, Matthew, and the Aldens in tense silence. He made his way through the mansion to a small courtyard fountain surrounded by sculpted hedges. The stone cherubs at the fountain center dribbled water, a mocking lullaby of calm in the midst of the biggest crisis of his life. Oliver had built an empire on his cunning and ambition. Yet, in the realm of personal relationships, it seemed he had no mastery at all. As the sound of hushed conversation and shuffling feet seeped from the house, he closed his eyes. The spectre of his unborn child haunted him. Was there a shred of regret within him? Perhaps. But overshadowing it all was the looming question: how would he regain control of this catastrophe? Oliver sank onto a wrought iron bench beside the fountain, the gentle burble of water lulling him into a state of reflection. In the quiet of the courtyard, moments from his past paraded through his mind with relentless clarity. He recalled the day he first met Evelyn van der Veer at a charity gala 5 years ago. She wore a shimmering silver gown that accentuated her graceful figure, and she spoke passionately about her philanthropic work with a children's hospital. Oliver, jaded by countless socialites who seemed only to chase status, was drawn to Evelyn's sincerity. They danced, they laughed, and by the end of the evening he found himself promising to call her the next day. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic dinners in Paris, yacht trips in the Mediterranean, and endless late-night conversations. Evelyn was unlike anyone Oliver had known, soft-spoken yet resolute, empathetic yet unafraid to voice her beliefs. Where Oliver saw a deal or a merger, Evelyn saw human impact, urging him to use his influence to improve lives, not just line pockets. When he proposed, it was at an intimate dinner at the top of the Eiffel Tower. She said yes, tears glistening in her eyes. In the early years of marriage, they were happy. They hosted grand parties at the Harrington estate, traveled the world, and even spoke of starting a family. But as Oliver's responsibilities expanded, so did the rift between them. He spent more time in boardrooms than at home. The arguments began first in whispers, then in late-night shouting matches. She felt he was abandoning his moral compass for profit. He felt she was naive, refusing to see the cutthroat reality of big business. Into this simmering tension stepped Clarissa Alden. She was bold, ambitious, and unapologetically materialistic, a mirror of Oliver in many ways. The first time they met was at an exclusive launch party for her couture line. Their attraction was instantaneous, the electricity of shared ambition too intense to ignore. They started an affair, Evelyn, sensing the distance, tried to reignite their marriage, but Oliver was already drifting away. He remembered Evelyn confronting him one morning, tears streaming down her face. "I know you're with her," she said simply. "Why, Oliver? Why can't you at least talk to me?" His response was cold, laced with denial and dismissal. After that day, Evelyn retreated. She rarely smiled. Eventually, she packed a small bag and left for Europe, telling him she needed space. Oliver allowed it, even supported it financially, believing it was best if she quietly slipped from his life. He never anticipated she would return, certainly not pregnant, and definitely not at his wedding to Clarissa. But here he was, an empire at stake and a public scandal overshadowing it all. A rustle of footsteps pulled him from his reverie. He opened his eyes to find Matthew Glenn hovering near the hedges, phone in hand. "Oliver," Matthew said quietly, "I've reached out to your PR team. They want to issue a statement that says the wedding is postponed due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Is that acceptable?" Oliver nodded mechanically. "Yes, do that." He paused. "Has anyone seen Evelyn?" Matthew shook his head. "She drove off in a black town car. The staff says she took the west exit. You might still catch her if you hurry, or maybe not. She didn't look like she planned on staying." A hollow ache bloomed in Oliver's chest. He realized that for all his power, he had no idea how to fix this. "So she's gone," he whispered. "And Clarissa?" "Fuming," Matthew replied. "She's still in the drawing room with her parents. They're insisting on some type of explanation or plan before more guests start leaving. Oliver, we need damage control. You have to pick a direction, either salvage things with Clarissa publicly or figure out how to handle Evelyn's revelations." Oliver pressed his palms into his eyes, feeling a headache forming. He weighed his options. Publicly acknowledging Evelyn's pregnancy would cause a media circus. Denying her claim would be even worse if proven otherwise. "I need a few more minutes," he said, exhaling slowly. "Can you keep them calm?" Matthew nodded, heading back into the mansion to play mediator. Oliver turned his attention to the fountain again. A single memory surfaced. Evelyn laughing with him at a charity event, her hand on his arm, her eyes brimming with warmth. It struck him that once upon a time, love had been the reason for everything. Money, power, and appearances had overshadowed that reason, leading him to where he was now at the brink of losing everything meaningful. The notion that he might be a father shook him to his core. He envisioned a child with Evelyn's gentle eyes, or perhaps his stubborn chin. A swirl of emotions, fear, excitement, shame collided in his chest. If he turned his back on Evelyn and this baby, would he ever truly be at peace? And what of Clarissa, whose own ambitions mirrored his? His world had splintered. Each path forward seemed fraught with peril. A messy divorce, a public scandal, or a custody battle that would drag the Harrington name through tabloids for years. Despite all the wealth he had, Oliver felt a profound sense of powerlessness. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. The guests might be dispersing, but the day was far from over. The next steps he took would define the rest of his life, both personally and in the eyes of the world. The question was, would he chase after Evelyn to face his responsibilities, or would he shore up his relationship with Clarissa in an attempt to preserve the empire he cherished above all else? Oliver re-entered the mansion, weaving through the corridors with single-minded purpose. He found Clarissa in the same drawing room, perched on a velvet settee. Her pristine wedding gown formed a dramatic puddle of white fabric around her, yet she looked anything but serene. Her parents stood nearby, their expressions tinged with worry and anger. At Oliver's entrance, Clarissa snapped her gaze toward him. The fury in her eyes hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified. "I was about to go looking for you," she said in a clipped tone. "We need to talk." Oliver's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, we do." Matthew Glenn lingered in the doorway, uncertain whether to stay. Sensing the tension, he quietly slipped out, pulling the doors closed behind him to give them privacy. Peter and Lydia Alden started to follow, but Clarissa motioned for them to remain. "I'm not going through this alone," she declared, leveling Oliver with a glare. Oliver cleared his throat. "I understand." Clarissa, the first, never meant for things to get so complicated. "Complicated," she repeated, her voice laced with incredulity. "You're still married, and your wife is pregnant with your child." Lydia Alden spoke up, her tone icy. "Oliver, how could you let this wedding proceed if you knew there was a chance your wife would resurface? You've put Clarissa in an impossible position." Peter Alden stood with his arms crossed. "We've respected you, Oliver, despite the moral quandaries. But this is beyond a simple misunderstanding. The entire wedding is in shambles." Oliver raised a hand, an attempt to steady the conversation. "I didn't know Evelyn would return. She left months ago and cut off communication. I tried to finalize our divorce, but she wouldn't cooperate. My lawyers were working on it. Then she vanished. I didn't know she was pregnant." Clarissa's lip trembled, rage flickering into heartbreak. "So you were planning to push through a wedding with me while still legally married? Did you think that a piece of paper from the courts was just a formality we could sort out later?" His gaze dropped to the antique rug beneath his feet. "I convinced myself it would be handled discreetly. I never expected Evelyn to appear like this." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, the distant hum of guests, mingling in confusion, seeped through the mansion's walls. At last, Clarissa spoke, her voice wavering. "What are we supposed to do now? My reputation, my business, everything is on the line. I'm labeled as the other woman who tried to steal a married man. Oliver, do you realize how vicious the tabloids will be?" Oliver inhaled slowly, grappling for words that would calm her. "We can manage the press, Clarissa. We'll issue statements. My PR team is top-notch. They'll spin the story that the wedding was postponed due to a personal emergency, and we can." Clarissa cut him off. "And what about Evelyn? Do you plan to ignore her pregnancy? Do you plan to deny her child is yours?" The question struck him like a blow to the gut. For all his talk of spin and damage control, the truth was that there was a baby on the way. His baby. He couldn't simply file that under public relations. "No," he admitted softly. "I can't deny that child. If it's mine, I have to do right by it." Peter Alden's scowl deepened. "Then what about Clarissa? Do you abandon her because your wife is pregnant?" Oliver closed his eyes, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have all the answers right now, Peter. This isn't just about one person. It's about all of us. Clarissa, you know how I feel about you." She rose from the settee, towering over him even in her wedding heels. "Oh, do I? Because from where I'm standing, the man I love just humiliated me in front of the world by letting his pregnant wife crash our wedding." "Clarissa," he started, only to be cut off by the sharp squeal of her father's voice. "Enough," Peter said. "This is not the time for sweet talk. We need to consider the legal ramifications. Our families have reputations to uphold." Lydia nodded, her posture stiff with indignation. "Indeed. What's to stop Evelyn from seeking a massive settlement or dragging us all into a scandalous paternity suit?" A swirl of emotions churned in Oliver's mind. The weight of the Harrington empire bore down on him. He was used to controlling narratives, forging alliances, and buying loyalty. But this was no business negotiation. This was raw, personal, and intimately intertwined with the core of his identity. He took a step forward and clasped Clarissa's hands in his. "Listen, I know you feel betrayed and angry. I promise I'll work this out. We'll handle whatever legal issues arise. But we need to stand together, not tear each other apart." She stared at him, tears threatening to spill from her heavily masquerade lashes. "I gave up everything to be with you," she whispered. "I pinned all my hopes on you. If you choose her now, if you decide to go back to your wife, what happens to me?" He felt her desperation and realized, despite her ambition, Clarissa truly cared for him. "I don't want to lose you," he said, "but I owe it to myself and to that child to at least speak with Evelyn, to understand what she wants. If she just wants financial support, I can provide that. Maybe we can still move forward, but it'll take time." Clarissa withdrew her hands, her expression stoic. "I'm not waiting indefinitely, Oliver. I won't be your second choice. You have 1 week to make a decision. If you don't, I'll assume you've chosen Evelyn and your baby." "A week?" Lydia exclaimed. "That's a tight deadline." Clarissa turned to her mother. "I need to protect myself. I won't be strung along. Not again." Oliver's jaw tensed, but he nodded. "All right, a week. I'll talk to Evelyn, figure out how to resolve this. Meanwhile, we'll temporarily relocate you somewhere quiet, away from the paparazzi. My security team can help." Peter and Lydia exchanged wary glances, but Clarissa nodded. "Fine, but remember, Oliver, this scandal might break us, or it might strengthen us. It depends on what you choose." As the Aldens and Clarissa swept from the room, Oliver felt the weight of her ultimatum. A single week to decide between the mother of his unborn child and the woman he had pledged to marry. The clock was ticking, and every second brought him closer to a choice that would reshape his life forever. 2 days after the ruined wedding, the Harrington estate was eerily still. The guests had dispersed, the decorators had packed up their floral arrangements, and the media frenzy had mostly shifted to the tabloids and online rumor mills. The headline on every glossy cover read something like, "Billionaire bridegroom exposed. Wife interrupts wedding pregnant." Oliver could barely stand to look at the coverage. He holed up in his study, a room lined with dark mahogany bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes on business strategy, history, and rare first editions of classic literature. The drapes were drawn, shutting out the daylight. A solitary desk lamp illuminated the swirl of paperwork before him, legal documents, drafted press statements, and a half-finished letter to Evelyn. He had tried calling and texting Evelyn, but she hadn't responded. She had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. The only tangible clue he had was an address for a townhouse in Manhattan that her lawyer had forwarded, presumably for delivering legal paperwork. Oliver wasn't sure if she was actually staying there, but it was his best lead. A gentle knock on the study door startled him out of his brooding. "Come in," he called. Matthew Glenn entered, wearing a concerned expression. "Any word?" Oliver asked, although the slump of his shoulders suggested he already knew the answer. Matthew shook his head. "No, she's avoiding all contact. Listen, I managed to track down an old friend of hers, Marilyn Havers, who used to work with her on some charity committees. Marilyn says Evelyn's indeed in New York City, but she's not certain where." Oliver rubbed his forehead. "I just need to talk to her. If I can get her to sit down, to make her see reason, maybe we can find a path forward that doesn't involve public humiliation." Matthew sighed. "Oliver, in her eyes, the public humiliation has already occurred. She came to that wedding to expose you. She's wielding her pregnancy like a shield and a sword." Oliver grimaced. "Do you think she wants revenge? Or money? Maybe. Or maybe she just wants you to acknowledge her and the baby." "You did push her aside, Oliver." A pang of guilt shot through him. He opened his desk drawer and retrieved an ultrasound picture that Evelyn's lawyer had included with a brief note. The black and white image was grainy, but there was no mistaking the small shape forming within. "This changes everything," he murmured, staring at the sonogram. "I never wanted children before, but knowing one is on the way, it's overwhelming." Matthew stepped closer. "Do you see a life with Evelyn and this baby?" Oliver sighed, setting the picture down. "We were happy once, but so much has happened. The betrayal, the lies. And there's Clarissa to consider. If I walk away from her, she'll be devastated and furious. She's threatened to unleash her own set of scandals if I abandon her." "Yes," Matthew agreed. "Clarissa isn't someone who surrenders easily. She'll either stand by you or make your life miserable." Outside the study window, the winter sky was a bleak grey, matching Oliver's mood. He felt cornered, trapped by obligations, public perception, and his own mistakes. "I need to see Evelyn in person," he decided. "If she won't answer my calls, I'll go to Manhattan and find her." Matthew nodded. "That might be best. But be careful. The paparazzi are circling, hoping for another scoop." Oliver stood, scooping up his coat from a nearby armchair. "I'll take a discreet car. Send the security detail after me, but have them keep their distance. If I don't come back by this evening, tell Clarissa I'm just sorting things out." A flicker of hope lit in Matthew's eyes. "Be honest with her, Oliver. She deserves at least that, no matter what happens." Oliver left the estate, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his brow in a half-hearted attempt to go incognito. In the city, he slipped through the crowded streets with purposeful strides, scanning building numbers until he arrived at the townhouse address. He hesitated on the stoop, his heart pounding against his ribcage. Raising his hand, he pressed the doorbell. He waited, breath misting in the cold air. No response. A second time, he rang. Finally, the door opened a crack, and an older woman's face appeared. "Yes, I'm looking for Evelyn Harrington," he said quietly. "Is she here?" The woman's gaze hardened. "And who are you?" "My name is Oliver," he said, clearing his throat. "Her husband." She studied him for a moment before opening the door. "Come in," she said, leading him into a small but elegant foyer. "My name is Beth. I'm a friend of Evelyn's, from her church group." Oliver's gaze darted around. The foyer was decorated with tasteful paintings and soft lighting, a far cry from the opulence of his mansion. "Where is she?" he asked. Beth pursed her lips. "She's resting. The pregnancy hasn't been easy on her, especially with all the stress from recent events." Guilt stabbed at him again. "May I see her?" Beth motioned for him to wait, disappearing into a back room. Several minutes passed before Evelyn appeared, wearing a flowing sweater that concealed her pregnancy only slightly. She eyed Oliver warily. He swallowed. "Evelyn." She said nothing at first, arms folded protectively over her stomach. Finally, she spoke in a voice strained but steady. "What do you want, Oliver?" He took a tentative step toward her. "I want to talk. About us, about the baby, about everything that happened at the wedding." She snorted softly. "That wasn't a wedding, Oliver. It was a travesty." He nodded, accepting her anger. "You're right. I deserved that slap, and I know I deserve far worse. But I came here to see if we can find a way forward. A way that acknowledges this child without tearing everyone apart." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You don't get to walk in and play the negotiator now. You ignored me for months. You threatened me with legal action if I didn't quietly sign divorce papers. And all the while, you were planning a wedding with someone else." His shoulders sagged. "I was stupid, driven by ambition and lust, maybe. I hurt you in ways I never intended." Evelyn brushed a tear from her cheek. "You did, and I'll never forget that. But this baby is my future. I won't let anyone, least of all you, compromise that. Oliver reached out, carefully taking her hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. I want to be part of our child's life, he said, voice thick with emotion. She studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. Then choose, she whispered, Clarissa or me, because I won't allow my child to grow up in a circus where his father is half-dedicated at best. Oliver's chest tightened, remembering Clarissa's ultimatum as well. He had only 5 days left in that 1-week countdown. She pulled her hand away. I'm not demanding an immediate answer, but if you truly care about this baby, show me through your actions, not your words. He nodded slowly, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He realized that no matter which path he chose, heartbreak loomed. But this was no longer a business deal. It was his life, his child, and the woman he once loved standing before him. For the first time in years, Oliver Harrington felt stripped of his power. Here, in this modest townhouse, faced with the reality of his unborn child, he knew that his next steps would define him in ways no corporate merger or social standing ever could. 4 more days passed, each one laden with anxiety and dread. Oliver spent most of that time in the Harrington estate, trying to avoid the paparazzi lurking at the gates. He engaged in marathon phone calls with his legal team, attempted to negotiate a quiet settlement that might appease everyone, but still no solution felt right. Meanwhile, Clarissa sequestered herself in a luxury penthouse he provided on the Upper East Side. She refused to see him, though she allowed brief phone calls that typically ended in heated arguments or silent resentment. She remained firm on her deadline, 1 week from the day of the wedding fiasco. As the clock ticked down, Oliver realized that this decision boiled down to more than just love or obligation. It was about the life he wanted to lead and the kind of man he wanted to be. Throughout his life, he had never faced a crisis that required moral conviction over strategic cunning. But now, cunning was useless without integrity. On the 7th day, Oliver sat behind the grand desk in his study, hands trembling. The phone rang, and he answered it with weary resignation. Yes, it's me, Clarissa said. Her voice was tight, as if she was holding back a torrent of emotions. It's been a week, Oliver. I need your decision. Are you coming to me or going back to her? He closed his eyes. Clarissa, he started softly. I've given this a lot of thought. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You deserve better than what I gave you. But Evelyn is my wife. And there's a child, my child. I can't turn my back on them. A cold silence settled on the line. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling with anger. So you've chosen her. It's not about choosing her in a romantic sense, Oliver said, choking on the complexity of his emotions. It's about doing right by the family I already have. I'm not sure Evelyn will ever forgive me, and I'm not sure we can be what we were before. But my child deserves a father, Clarissa. She let out a bitter laugh, a sound laced with heartbreak. Your child deserves a father, and I deserved a wedding, a marriage, a future. You've robbed me of that, Oliver. He swallowed, feeling powerless to console her. I can provide for you, financially, anything you need. Money, she echoed with disgust. That's all you ever really knew how to give, wasn't it? Save your money, Oliver. I don't want your charity. But know this, if you think you'll waltz back into polite society with your pregnant wife by your side and no consequences, you're dead wrong. I'm going to tell the world exactly what happened. The Harrington name will never recover from this scandal. He stared at the polished wood of his desk, feeling the echo of her words. Do what you must, he said quietly. I deserve the fallout. Her voice dropped to a near hiss. I never thought I'd see the day you'd choose moral duty over ambition. Congratulations on your big revelation. Then she hung up, leaving Oliver with the dial tone ringing in his ear. He set the phone aside, exhaling unsteadily. The wave of regret that washed over him was staggering, but beneath it lay a flicker of relief that he had finally made a choice aligned with something deeper than profit or appearances. For the next hour, he paced through the mansion, ignoring the calls and texts from the outside world. Then, in a burst of determination, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside. He instructed his chauffeur to drive him to the townhouse in Manhattan. Once there, Oliver knocked on the door with a new sense of resolve. Beth answered, her expression uncertain, but she stepped aside to let him in. He found Evelyn in the living room, seated on a couch with a book resting on her lap. At the sight of him, she tensed, eyebrows knitting together in wariness. I made my choice, he said, hands trembling. Clarissa and I are done. I can't promise we'll fix everything between us, Evelyn, but I can promise I'll be here for you and the baby. Whatever you decide you need from me. She studied his face, searching for any hint of falsehood. At length, she spoke. And what if I choose to divorce you anyway? Oliver nodded slowly. I'll respect that. But divorce or not, I want to be part of our child's life. I'll provide for you both, do everything I can to be a father. A strangled sob broke from her throat, and tears welled in her eyes. Why couldn't you see this before? Why did you have to break everything in the pursuit of your own ego? He stepped forward cautiously, sitting on the edge of a chair across from her. I was blinded by ambition, by the idea that I could have it all: wealth, power, and love on my own terms. I was wrong. She brushed away tears. Actions speak louder than words, Oliver. So far, your actions have been selfish. If you mean to stay, I need proof you've changed. He nodded, voice solemn. I understand. I'll give up controlling stakes in some of my projects. Step back from the day-to-day mania of the business world. I'll spend more time here with you. We can go to counseling if you want. Or if you'd rather I remain in the background, I'll do that too. Just let me prove I can be better. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, her gaze flickering with a mixture of anger, sadness, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. At last, she set aside her book, folded her hands in her lap, and said, We'll start with the basics. Doctor's appointments, schedules, open communication. If you can manage that, maybe there's a chance. Oliver felt a wave of relief, tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning of atonement. That's all I ask, he said softly. A chance. She exhaled, placing a hand on her belly. We'll see. For now, that's enough. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the fragile truce being forged behind these doors. Oliver stared at Evelyn, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and renewed purpose. He knew repairing their relationship, if it was even possible, would take time. But for once in his life, time was something he was willing to devote fully, unselfishly, to another person. The Harrington Empire might never be the same, and the tabloids would have a feast. Clarissa would likely drag his name through the mud. But none of that mattered as much as the life he had set out to protect, the life growing within Evelyn. This was his second chance, perhaps his last, to be more than just a billionaire with a tainted legacy. It was his chance to be a father and, if fate allowed, a husband worthy of the title. A tumultuous journey ended with a single choice, one that shattered illusions and paved a new path built on remorse, humility, and the fragile promise of redemption. The road to reconciliation for Oliver and Evelyn remains uncertain, riddled with fresh challenges and old wounds still raw. Yet amid the public scandal, broken vows, and shattered trust, the glimmer of hope endures for the sake of the child soon to arrive. If you've been swept up by the twists, betrayals, and heartfelt confessions in this story, don't let the drama end here. Help keep the conversation alive by hitting that like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your support makes all the difference and ensures we can bring more captivating stories your way. So, remember to subscribe for more tales filled with passion, secrets, and powerful life lessons. Stay tuned, there's always more drama to come.